Okay, so pledges. Okay, and we have these little, look familiar? So, yeah, we got these pledges of resistance. And so I work with CLE, and I've actually gotten a lot of training through CLE, so they might look kind of similar. This is our pledge for the NISG group. And please, if you haven't filled out your evaluation, do so and leave it at the front desk. There's a box for it. And we still have t-shirts for sale. And we would like you all to share the stream if you guys are on social media. And we don't want to use this hashtag. We're using the hashtag dismantling the nuclear beast. So hashtag dismantle the nuclear beast. And please share our Ustream because we want to invite everyone all over the world to join us today. Okay, so sorry, I'm cutting into your time, Clee. We're starting pretty late, so we might be running over a little bit, and we're going to cut lunch a little bit. So I apologize to everyone because I know we need a break, but that's it for me. So thank you, everyone, and now we're going to have Clee's presentation, and we'll dim the lights. So yeah.
I introduced myself yesterday, and I think you're a bit familiar. Some of the information's in the program here, so I won't take up too much time. And through the course of this presentation, I'll talk a little bit more about who I am, where I come from, and the experiences that have really shaped who I am today in the work that I do. So we have a little technical workaround. So Graham, lovely assistant today, is going to be, we have a signal, right? Next, okay, cool. So this is a bit where I come from. My relatives come from a little area known as Big Mountain on Black Mesa. They've been faced with resource colonialism and dispossession of our ancestral homelands since 1974. They've waged long-term occupation resistance of their ancestral homelands in the face of the military might and power of the so-called U.S. government. And so this is where my family comes from, a lot of the roots. So I take a lot of inspiration from the matriarchs of the Big Mountain resistance. I also want to just invoke and acknowledge the spirit of Corbin Harney, who is somebody who, my family, my father's a Hitathi, a Diné medicine person, and my mom, she's a bit of a dichotomy. She's an old folk singer from the village, Greenwich Village area, but an long-term anti-nukes activist as well. And so we used to host Corbin when he'd come through Flagstaff or northern Arizona as well, and I've been out to Ward Valley. And so just want to invoke his spirit in a range of folks who have come before in this very spiritual struggle to protect our Mother Earth. So we'll go next. The defense of lands held sacred by indigenous peoples are the front lines of the struggle for our existence. They are targets of those who view Mother Earth not as a living entity, but as a commodity that can be exploited for material gain. So every sacred site that currently is being desecrated, and we heard throughout this symposium about the threats to sacred places, they are faced with some form of, or part of the cycle, as in the case with the dumping specifically, of resource extraction, whether it's coal beneath Black Mesa, uranium in the Black Hills, Red Butte, Mount Taylor, gold at Mount Tenabo, copper at Oak Flat, oil in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, natural gas in Chaco Canyon, geothermal at Medicine Lake, telescopes on Mount Graham or Mauna Kea, or recreation at the San Francisco Peaks, which I have a lot of experience with, and I'll be sharing some of my direct action work with that. But these are all forms of resource extraction that are a direct result of the commodification of our natural environment. So from Mother Earth to our bodies, everything has been reduced to a commodity. This means that nothing is sacred in the context of capitalism. So long as the lands, and by extension our bodies, are viewed as a commodity, we'll have this conflict, as capitalism really is the enemy of Mother Earth. So when we talk about settler colonialism and the very specific extreme violence of nuclear colonialism, and the reason that I'm expressing this at the beginning is that we have to expose and implicate the systems of oppression that they are also rooted in. So we'll move to the next. So I think you jumped ahead. You can go back. There we go. So if we're going to dismantle, we need tools to chop it up. And this is an orientation more than a workshop. as what I'm sharing with you today it should be a 2-day workshop, hands-on workshop, is usually how we format these. But I'll cover the framework for indigenous-rooted direct action that myself and a collective crew have developed over the years in defense of sacred places. This is a result really of awesome and sometimes not so awesome experiences where things have blown up in our faces and we've learned from those bad experiences and made sure that we've come back with sharper claws, more fierce. So there's lots to cover. So some of this stuff I'll go over quickly. So please ask questions, comments while the presentation is going on. If there's a need for clarification, if there's too much jargon, you can feel free to hold up. I love that anti-jargon page in the pamphlet. So feel free to just interject. But I am working towards reserving a good chunk of this presentation for some discussion, especially around experience that folks have, because there's a wealth of knowledge and experience in this room that have sort of formulated where we're at today in the struggle, direct action struggle to end nuclear colonialism. So just some quick notes. Everything's being filmed, so be smart about what you share when we do share. We'll cover security culture later, but maybe that should be first. And another note, I also reject institutionalization and the commodification of liberatory knowledge and academic industrial, especially in academic industrial complex spaces, because they're not terribly conducive to grounded liberatory expression. And so what I mean by that is, this setting is not the setting that I like to engage in. Usually it's in circles around fires or, in a non-institutional framework. But with that, let's go. So now the next, sorry. So yes, we are going to be talking about dismantling. So you knew it was coming, right? You saw the pictures of the beast. This may be a bit messy, and not all of y'all are going to agree with what I say, or you might not like what I have to say as well, but that's fine because we can disagree. That's how we engage in critical dialogue and we grow, especially in our movements. It's necessarily, especially for efficacy in our movements. So I'm going to be really talking about, this conversation is for those of you who are looking for more tools or to sharpen your tools to chop up the nuclear beast. So this is a little bit more nitty gritty. Yeah, well, hopefully that's why you're here. So the next. The initial title of this talk was going to be How Dar Slayed the Nuclear Beast, but I don't think Leona would have approved. And this is my initial concept for the poster, because I designed the poster, but I thought it was maybe a little bit gratuitous. Actually, can anybody name this image comes from? Or not the image, but the Dar, where Dar comes from? I'll give you a free t-shirt, the nuclear colonialism t-shirt, if you can say where Dar comes from. No, not He-Man. There's a movie from the 80s. Beastmaster. Who said Beastmaster? Oh, of course, it's Tara Gatewood says Beastmaster. So you get to pick out your lovely and nuclear colonialism T-shirt afterwards. Okay, but just so you know, this is Dar. He was the last surviving member of the Sula tribe, and Dar has come to avenge his people and dismantle the nuclear beast. So we're also invoking the spirit of Dar today. Oh, Beastmaster. I'm not going to go into the synopsis. So next. Oh, is your computer malfunctioning? Dar was too much for the computer. Oh, let's go back real quick. There's a blank slide, so just press play. There's a video. I don't think we have the audio synced up, but I'm sharing this. Well, it's just I just wanted to sort of start with a bit of an energizer, and since this isn't our typical workshop, just wanted to show. This is Unidos back in, I believe it said 2011, which is a migrant and indigenous youth group that was resisting the attack on ethnic studies in so-called Tucson or Tucson occupied O'odham lands. And so what they did is they showed up at the school board, they planned a public demonstration, maybe you can turn up a little bit so you can hear the awesome, beautiful noise. So there's a protest outside of the school board meeting. huge solid there. So when education is under attack, what do we do? Fight back. So when our communities are under attack, what do we do? Yeah. So the energy, the fierceness, it was Unidos, a brilliant, powerful youth group resisting, again, attack on ethnic studies. This action effectively shut down the school board meeting with an occupation. And there's a lot of details that go into it, but I just wanted to share this and just get our minds sort of in that space of fierceness. And this resulted in no charges. They shut down that meeting. They entered in protracted negotiations with the school board. There's a lot of beautiful things that came out of it. Leilani Clark was one of the folks sort of behind this with Unidos, and she's a co-facilitator and organizer and one of the people that usually facilitates this presentation with me. So I just wanted to bring that spirit up. But the real reason I'm sharing this is because yesterday, I can't remember your name, Karen, stated something about no, the power of no. You love no. Can you explain a little bit why you love no? So do you have a chant that you like to say that has no in it? How about no nukes? Right? Can we chant that right now just to assert that power? Would you mind leading us with that? I thought you said you loved saying no nukes. No nukes! No nukes! No nukes! Okay, that's good. That's good. Whoa, you're going to get carried away. See, this kind of energy, though, this is power. And this helps us to build our nerve, right? It helps to build that fierceness that we have. Because when we say no, what are we doing? We're asserting our power. We're establishing a boundary, and we're asserting that. And we can do that in ways that not only reclaim our power and build that for our communities, but we're connected to our ancestors and the prayers that we're standing on and the land that we're also representing and the beings that we don't have. So this is about power when we're talking about direct action. So let's move on. Y'all got some beautiful power. So what is direct action? You're here because you have a willingness to stand against unjust laws and produce a desired change. Who goes to protest just to get arrested? Takes a certain kind of crazy. But we're going to focus today on the practical aspects of strategies and tactics that can help you be effective since you are willing, hopefully, to get arrested or want to learn more about it, if necessary, in order to accomplish your goals. So this is going to be a bit 101 orientation with some review. So for those of you who are direct action veterans, I guess I'll sort of work on addressing some of the refining and sharpening the tools, but also addressing why direct action shouldn't be just something that organizers think of that happens when all else fails. So it's not just a contingency plan, it's actually something that could be embedded in a way of life. Direct action is complicated, it's diverse, and innovative. When initiated well, it can be very effective. While we're not going to focus on the why regarding the driving issues and struggles necessary here, because I think the symposium really establishes that, the why, but for our purposes it's important to establish that direct action just isn't, again, a contingency plan, or just isn't something that we run off and do without a plan. And so that's about what we're going to be focusing on. Usually this, we like to do this sort of pop-ed basis to just community source or crowdsource what direct action is, but I'm just going to sort of rush through this. So next, please. So yes, the problem is we have too many weeds in the garden. So what do we do about it? Of course, we form a committee, we sign a petition, we form an organization, we get spokespeople, we create whatever bureaucracy is necessary, we march, we vote, we maybe create a board because our organization is so massive and we've done such a great job at amassing and accumulating social and material capital. The foundations love us, they're raining down money. We take out ads, we get newspaper, and then bang, we got the weeds pulled. Yay, right? Okay, so next, direct action is cutting out the middleman. So if we got a problem, there's some weeds, well, we just pick it up. If anybody's a farmer or gardener, that's the simplest way that I like to express what direct action is. For strategy, organizers need to understand power. Information is not power until it leads to mobilization. So you may have a good argument or cause you care about, but why should anybody listen or take notice? So we ask, we really have to ask ourselves, why hasn't the change that I want already taken place? For example, asking for a wage increase from a boss is an attempt at verbal persuasion, but refusing to work until wage increase happens is nonviolent direct action. So it's a threat to power. It's basically anytime you've done something that you aren't supposed to do, or not done something that you're supposed to do, that can be a form of direct action. So we ask ourselves, where do we get our power from? And understand that power dynamics and power relationships are prevalent throughout all spheres of society. So power is not a mistake, misunderstanding, or disagreement. Justice is won by taking power away from the powerful and dismantling their institutions. So it's great that we're talking about dismantling this beast. So think about the complex dimensions and differences of moral persuasion versus power. Are your opponents or is your audience going to be moved by persuasion or perhaps something else? So next, please. So what is direct action? Direct action is unmediated expression of individual or collective desires. It also means instead of getting somebody else to act for you or go a politician, institution, etc., you act for yourself. Direct action challenges the dependency and marginalization created by hierarchy, especially if you're building alternate institutions, which we'll talk about later. Direct action can also be a tactic or a way of life, something that also can hopefully be both. And I think an indigenous rooted direct action, and I'll break that down a little bit more, is a little bit more related to that. Direct action also encompasses a range of acts to achieve political or social goals. And there's a difference between civil disobedience and direct action too. Civil disobedience is breaking laws that you believe unjust. Direct action can be a little bit further from that. And I won't spend too much time breaking down the distinction, but it's just important to note. So next, please. So we have basically 3 direct action categories that we identify in the work that we do. The first one is protest. Underneath the categories, you can see things like rallies, banner drops, pickets, theaters, bird dog. Anybody know what bird dogging is? Yeah, yes, no. Can anybody explain what bird dogging is real quick? An example? Yeah, we don't call it harassing, but yeah, we follow around and highlight, expose, shine a spotlight on cockroach politics, and hopefully when the light's on they scatter. But we follow them around and let people know where the problem is and focus people's attention on it. And people do that in very creative, in very interesting ways. So die-ins, back-turning, keyboard activism, which isn't used in a pejorative here, projection, wheat pasting. The second category is non-cooperation, so anything that disrupts the functioning of the system. This is the realm of civil disobedience. So rent strikes, tax-resisting boycotts, there's a range of different kinds of strikes, walkouts, sit-ins, going limp, alternative systems, like food not bombs is a powerful form of direct action. You're cutting out the middleman, you're cutting out the state, right? You're directly addressing poverty in your community, so it's a powerful form of direct action. Pirate radio, again, there's a range of different community-based alternatives, creating food systems, local food systems in your communities and so forth. Intervention, childcare actually can be an alternative, and powerful form of direct action. So intervention is our third category, directly intervening in the functioning of the system. So, and I'll make a differentiation between the kinds of occupations, blockades, forest defense, Sea Shepherd, ELF, Earth Liberation Front, for those of you who don't know, which is sabotage, property destruction, which we're not covering today. That's more below ground. We're mainly talking about above ground work today. Hacktivism, ANON kind of work, autonomous zones, so creating larger autonomous zones, like the temporary autonomous zone, is part of the ongoing resistance to the mega airport right now in France. Beautiful, powerful action that's happening. So next. And actually just one quick note about that is there are, part of what we're looking at, and this can be a mixture of all of those categories, is holding space or creating contested zones. So there are also symbolic actions and distinctions between hard and soft actions, as I mentioned, above and below, which we'll talk a little bit more. But yeah, so this is a worksheet that we use that identifies points of intervention. And so we identify 5 points of intervention in the work, which is, the first one is point of destruction. So it's where the realm of resource extraction, such as logging, mining, etc., point of toxic discharge, realm of road blockades, tree sits. So we identify the point of intervention, and then we brainstorm intervention ideas. And so there's 5 of these categories, and I'll explain why after I go through them. So the second one is point of production, so it's factory, croplands, realm, and this is the realm of strikes, picket lines typically. So point of production, for example, can be the White Mesa Mill. Point of consumption, so anywhere where any consumer is engaged with whatever product is being produced, like chain stores, supermarkets, places where customers are reached, realm of consumer boycotts, markets and market campaigns. The next one is point of decision. So the corporate headquarters, slumlord office, location of targeted decision maker. If anybody does power mapping, if you use that utility in your campaign development, typically you'll identify who the decision makers are, who has power to make a decision regarding an issue, and that's a point of intervention. And the last one is something that people don't necessarily focus on, is the point of assumption. So this is challenging the underlying beliefs or the narratives that control the story around the issue. And so we challenge the mythologies that are usually produced by these corporations that have tons of resources and pay high-paid PR firms. And so we ask ourselves, what is the assumption that we're challenging, and we find ways to break that narrative. So anytime we design a direct action, we actually always ask ourselves, what is the underlying assumption here in this issue? Are we being proactive? Are we being reactive? How can we refine our message that it gets directly to our audience, our community as well? And so there's something that is a bit creative that we employ, which is called direct action storytelling. So we look at the way the narratives are being shaped or framed by our opposition, and we find ways to deconstruct that narrative and spin it and turn it around, but not just through PR work, but actually with our actions as well. Because anytime we take an action, we're sharing a message, we're communicating. So the points of interventions are places in a system where action can be taken to effectively interrupt, challenge, and change the system and the story about it. So we clarify with our group or on an individual basis, our organizing, what system we're targeting, and identify the points and come up with intervention ideas for each. So how will our action, we ask ourselves, how will our action change people's understanding of the issue, its impacts, and the possible alternatives? Our action always supports the message. So we have a message that we're promoting in our campaigns. Our action always supports the message. It has to be in line with it. Anytime that you plan a protest or any kind of public demonstration, you're communicating. So your actions, again, should be informed by your message. That way people are getting a clear and concise understanding of what your demands are, what the issue is, the way you're framing it, what your goals are, and what they can do to help you reach your goal. So the other point here too is tactics versus issues. When we plan an action, we usually create a picture. What's the one picture that we want to communicate what we're doing here, and how can we create the visuals to support that? And we don't tell people how we did something. We show them why, or we communicate what the issue is, the way we want to frame the issue and challenge the relations, the narratives of power that we're facing. And so. Next, please. Let's talk a little bit about indigenous-rooted direct action here. So wherever there's an ecological crisis, there's a cultural crisis because we're people of the earth. It's not just that we know the earth also knows us. That's what we mean when we say indigenous. So can you articulate your relationship to indigenous people whose lands you're on? Is that relationship meaningful, beyond tokenizing, not just involving indigenous people in your organizing for charismatic prayer, not just acknowledging indigenous people whose lands we're on, but making sure that they're in the room at the table and helping to make decisions, and making sure that they're not just viewed as victims. We ask ourselves, who is setting the terms? Who sets the agenda? And so we have some points in the next, please, that help identify and define indigenous-rooted direct action. So the first is rejecting dependency on colonial political systems and institutions to reach our goals, which is a lot easier to say than do. Directly, but in the process, if we're aware of this dynamic, then it can help shape the way we're engaging with colonial powers and not reinforcing them, right? So it directly challenges and disrupts ideas, structures, and behaviors that uphold and perpetuate colonial power, that's actually something that we can do on an everyday basis. It is informed and guided and supported by indigenous cultural knowledge. It recognizes the deep history of liberatory actions engaged by indigenous people. It's intersectional. It recognizes that colonialism is facilitated by white supremacy, heteropatriarchy, and capitalism. So next. It also empowers traditional communication methods and uses the language when it's appropriate and possible. It's culturally and spiritually appropriate and accountable. It challenges all assumptions of victimhood, which I mentioned earlier. It recognizes that indigenous people are not monolithic, but incredibly diverse and should be represented or presented as such at any given opportunity. And this is important because we even perpetuate this ourselves as indigenous organizers, this pan-indigenous sort of like idea of what resistance even looks like and what organizing or the way we care about Mother Earth even looks like, which is, there's no monolith. It also, the next one is it does not perpetuate recolonization, invisibilization, or direct colonialism of other indigenous peoples' lands. And so Diné people have an interesting way of making everything centered about us. There's a, hashtag Diné-centrism. It's an in-group joke, I guess. But we challenge that. We challenge it in our organizing in our groups. It also recognizes and seeks to heal land trauma. And I wish we had time to just focus on land trauma, and hopefully you can reflect on this term and study a little bit about it. I don't have enough time to go into it, but land trauma is important because not just recognizing that we're traumatized, but the land is traumatized, and our relationship to the land is, reciprocal. An important point about that, yeah, I can share resources. We can talk about this after. We can talk about land trauma afterwards because it's a very important concept, especially when we're talking about sacred sites, because it directly addresses the issues and intersections of the transphobia that we face, our relatives on the street, alcoholism. When we talk about land trauma, we talk about healing those social ills. We talk about getting to the root causes. So it's a very important discussion. Next. So this is an example of land trauma. We have the Atlas Mill, Moab, Utah. We could probably all name this group with the group here. We have White Mesa Mill, we have Nevada Test Site, and we also have Red Butte. This is 6 miles from the Grand Canyon. That's their frame, the head frame there, and that's Red Butte in the background, the sacred site. One thing that, I will say is that there are heteropatriarchal underpinnings of colonialisms that ensure that indigenous women in Two-Spirit are disproportionately targeted by violence and desecration. And that's something that we don't acknowledge in these spaces enough, but that's a component, a very powerful and important component of land trauma. It's how we treat the land, what we do to the land, we do to ourselves. So next. So with Diné cosmology, we have frameworks that we can use, like Sa'anoe, Bikahujon, which is our foundational philosophy and our way of life as Diné people. And we can draw from these cultural frameworks for action, and not to be all Diné-centric, but I'm drawing from what I know, the way I was raised. And they can be frameworks for action. It establishes where we get our power from. Because we don't use our own power, we work with the power of Mother Earth. And that is cyclical, it's non-linear. So instead of thinking of a campaign as beginning, middle, end, it's like, hey, there's a cycle of a campaign here. How are we working in relation to Mother Earth and our communities? How are we being, perpetuating these cycles and not just thinking of it as beginning, middle, and end, and we have a victory and it's over. But it also establishes that we get to the root cause and that we're spiritually grounded when we operate with these frameworks, which is very important because I think the spiritual grounding of the framework for action helps us to avoid burnout. There's a lot of times you hear different activist circles, different places where people feel like they're burned out. It also establishes that when we're taking action, we're never alone. We're always standing with our ancestors. This framework is indigenous nation specific, so please don't appropriate, but relate. It's a reference point for varying our strategic approaches. Defending the sacred means fighting back to protect Mother Earth. Protecting sacred water means upholding our sacred duty to ensure a future for coming generations. This is not about one mine, one mill, or one pipeline. This is about the systems of power that generate them. And apparently, we're sitting in one of those systems to this day, right now. UNM, from what I understand. So next. So I just want to share this framework real quick without spending too much time. This is the Hall No Roadshow strategic framework where we establish this sort of pathway. We have education, coordination, a prayer gathering in conjunction with Havasupai Nation, and activation. And so with this process, we have a timeline, our targets established. This is a limited timeline that was actually implemented over this past summer. But part of the reason I'm sharing this is because this is a great example of how direct action is not just a contingency plan. It was built into our process because throughout our policy work, what we're doing is we're also going into communities, we're educating, empowering folks, and we're also developing community action teams or affinity groups, which I'll talk about in a bit, to be prepared in the event that we need to start blocking roads and so forth. And so we're being very transparent, we're being very open with the process, and we're empowering and making sure communities will engage in responsible action that doesn't put other people at risk, which I also talk about. So next, please. So this is the who, or from a Diné standpoint, the k'e part of the process. So what is an affinity group? I would like to pop-ed this, but I'm just going to rush past it. I apologize. But an affinity group is a small group of 5 to 20 people who work together autonomously on direct actions or other projects. Affinity groups generally consist of like-minded people who come together to get something done. Chances are you've probably been part of an affinity group and you may not have known it. Somebody got the joke. They collectively establish their goals, structure, and a group culture. If you're on your way to a major direct action or protest, forming an affinity group is one of the best ways to be effective and accomplish amazingly beautiful acts of resistance that are beyond the capability of individuals. And so that's why affinity groups, because we're stronger in numbers. I do want to emphasize here, this is a very important point, because when we talk about direct action, a lot of people just immediately say, well, I don't want to get arrested. Direct action does not mean arrest. There are so many diverse roles that comprise waging effective direct action campaigns. Not everyone has to, and not everyone should get arrested, and we'll talk about that here. The struggle really occurs on many fronts, from the research to the policy, political work, to the outreach, educational awareness, and so forth. But we have to ask ourselves before we engage, and as we start organizing, and even as an individual, what capacity do we have to wage action? We also ask and consider in our affinity group formation that we're not going to leave Mother Earth from an indigenous rooted position. We're not going to leave Mother Earth and other beings outside of our affinity group or our understandings of affinity group. That's why we have water here. The water is represented there with their autonomy. So this is part of that representation that we have here. It's not just an object, not something that's separate. There's blessings, there's prayers that are made. So that being is here and present with us. And that's how we relate. So we don't leave them out of our affinity group, because then we think about our actions in a responsible manner that's accountable to them and that relationship that we have with them, right? So we don't leave ceremony out, and we don't leave prayer out, because that is our connection to land, it's our connection to water. So next, please. So basic affinity group roles, we have an action team, which is folks who carry out the action. They're the arrestables, typically. Next. And you can just open them all up, just so we don't have to go through that. Action support, so it's the folks who bring water, help people get locked in or locked on, depending on what term you use. They bring food, depending on the long term or how long the term of the action is, and they do a range of things. They help with morale too, with chanting, and hold banners and so forth, but they're not typically arrestable. Liaisons, we have police and media liaisons. Police liaison is somebody who interfaces with the police to potentially negotiate, but their goal isn't to negotiate, it's typically to buy time. But police liaisons in many cases at actions can be independent people outside of the arrestable zone who interface initially with the police, and what they do is they just buy time. They say, hey, I'm here, I was asked by this group to talk with y'all about what their demands are, and maybe we can help resolve this issue. And especially if there's a crisis, and I'll show examples later, that you can precipitate by doing such a hard, complex lockdown that they want to negotiate and just cite out or cite and release people, and that's happened many times, and I'll show some examples, it's better. There's also media liaisons, because if you have tons of media who are showing up to an action, which almost never happens these days, but in the event that you do, because it has happened to me a couple of times, it's nice to have somebody who can just wrangle the media. You can just talk to the media, so you can have a clear, concise spokesperson who's out there delivering your very clear points that you've gone over, your media message that you've crafted. You can deliver it, so your audience that you're taking this action to reach out to can hear that and then engage however they want with your campaign. And so that also just doesn't leave the mystery of sending a press release and hoping that it gets picked up, and they hope they don't screw up your words too badly. But having a police liaison or a media liaison on site can help facilitate that. And it helps, just to have somebody in a dedicated role, because they can work on following up with media. They can work on issuing press releases as well. So we have jail support, which is a very critical role. We don't let our people go into the clutches of this beast, this other beast, the carceral state, without support. And that support usually looks like somebody who's on the outside on the landline or a prepaid line, who can receive a collect call, basically, from inside and let people know what their charges are. It also looks like, calling the jails, giving the name, date of birth of folks. There's a very specific role, the very specific tasks that you have as a jail support person, to make sure that people know what's going on, if there was maybe some surprises that happen at the action, so they're just not left in the dark. So jail support is a very critical role. We also have research, recon, surveillance. I can't tell you enough how important that is, because you need to make sure that cell phones or two-way radios work on site. You need to have an understanding of maybe the corporate headquarters you're targeting is not open that day. I was part of an action where some folks showed up. They had rehearsed this huge action. They did a lockdown on a gate, and the business wasn't open. They stayed there for like 3 hours. Nobody showed. There was not even maintenance or security people. And so we just took pictures and left. And it was an interesting rehearsal, but it was because they weren't open. So research important. Legal support, having either a legal team or having some kind of people's law resource in your community is very important. If you have that lined up previously, it can help you research potential laws and charges that you might face depending on the kind of action that you choose. It's not entirely necessary, but it's important to have, just because you don't want to go through the system alone. And if you have people who know how the law works, it is empowering. It demystifies the process. Having a medic isn't essential, but it's helpful depending on the scale of your action, the scope of your action. If you're in a remote area, if there's a potential for dehydration, if there's potential for sun exposure, potential for stepping on something or getting beaten, maced by the cops, okay, you probably want a medic, or at least somebody who has some kind of medical knowledge. And street medic teams are very powerful resources. If you don't have one in your community, I highly recommend, if somebody doesn't feel like they ever want to be in an arrestable position, train and learn. There's a lot of resources, amazing street medic groups out there that can help build street medic teams. And sometimes you can plan a direct action and not have a medic in your team, just as long as they know when to be there. It's helpful. So next. So we have just some considerations with affinity groups. I'm just going to go by this sort of quickly. Situational awareness, crowd dynamics, identifying dangers, exit strategies, staying calm, avoiding panic, having a buddy system, so that way if somebody gets snatched by cops, their buddy should know what happened, where they're at, and be able to report back to the group, and then you can organize and respond. Affinity group specific security culture, having your own kinds of communication system like Signal, which is a really powerful security app that you can use for communications. Names, if you want different code names to be fun. Affinity groups can also cluster for very large actions. So basically clusters look like, if you have 5 to 20 people per affinity group, if you have a mass scale action, you can have dozens and dozens of affinity groups of that many people coordinated and working together for very effective actions. And usually how that operates is you have one person in your affinity group, or two, depending on how big the action is, reporting to a spokes council or a cluster of different affinity groups. And then going back with that information and being able to coordinate on a very mass scale. Affinity groups, very powerful, larger scaled actions, organizing spokes groups, and so forth. So next. Important considerations for affinity groups, forming affinity groups is process. So identifying your internal group politics can help, prevent drama. Not that there's a guarantee. Creating your own sets of agreements of how you operate, what kinds of actions you're willing to take, and so forth are important. Your decision-making process, like consensus. Accountability and responsibility is really important because we face heteropatriarchy. That means we face sexual violence and rape culture in our communities. So building in from the beginning an accountability and responsibility process and mechanisms will make sure that we're not just reacting and responding if it happens, but making sure that we have a framework in place so we can address it and proceed as well. So Solidarity, Accomplices Not Allies is a zine that I helped co-author. Highly recommend that. We had copies out there. I can also throw up the resource list after this for y'all to engage. Next. So there's some basic indigenous rooted direct action agreements. I'm not going to go through all of these, but I can share them with you. But these are some specific ones for indigenous rooted direct action, like it's indigenous led. We got to think things through, so be strategic. Don't put anyone at risk who doesn't want to be. It's consensus based, respect diversity of tactics, mutual aid, which means we just support each other. We have each other's backs. We check oppressive behavior. We don't police our own movement. That means basically it's connected to respecting diversity of tactics. So if somebody wants to, go do something that's unplanned and they go do something, they want to smash a window, it's the autonomy of their risk. It might not help the movement, but diversity of tactics. We don't work with the cops. We don't work with the cops because we work with undocumented communities and the police represent structural violence. We don't work with the cops because they represent violence to our indigenous communities. So there's a lot of folks who choose to work with the police, but it makes it unsafe for vulnerable communities that are targeted by institutional violence of law enforcement. So keep that in mind when you're organizing. A lot of nonviolence organizers will say, oh, well, we need to negotiate with the police. Are you putting other people at risk when you're doing that? So be smart about that and think of that dynamic. Do not financially exploit the struggle for personal or organizational gain. It's up there as an agreement, but we got to make sure we check that and it doesn't happen. No drugs and alcohol. I'll explain a little bit more about that when we talk about security culture. So further non-Indigenous agreements, not every space, not every conversation, not every prayer, not every action is for you. You're not entitled to those spaces. Sometimes just respect that there's a space that needs to be set aside for Indigenous people, people of color, and so forth. Step up, step back, and curb your enthusiasm. Sometimes there's a lot of well-meaning white folks especially who show up. They're ready to, they have all the tools, they've been through all the workshops, they know how to do it so they can fix the problem. Problem is they crowd out the space and opportunity for young people to engage and grow and learn those skills. So think about, maybe curb your enthusiasm, step up by stepping back and finding ways to support and critically engage to transfer that knowledge and empower communities as opposed to just fill a hole. Accomplices, not allies, again. We address that in varying levels. Next, please. So I just put this up there because, just throw it up there. So direct action doesn't happen outside of organizing. We have large-scale campaigns. It doesn't happen as an anomaly. Otherwise, it's just reactionary. Strategy should drive our tactics and not the other way around. We don't focus on outcomes or outputs, which outputs are 1,000 people at a march, or we shut down this space for this X amount of time. We have this many petition signatures, but we focus on outcomes. Is this action that we're taking moving us specifically towards our goals? And that's outcomes. And so sometimes we think about more about numbers than actually the outcomes in our organizing. So the only reason I'm putting this up there is because this is not an organizing workshop, this is a direct action workshop, is because we do things strategically. Otherwise, our tactics are driving our strategies when it should always be the other way around. So we'll move next to tactics. So these are some examples of direct actions that we waged to stop snowball from desecrating the holy San Francisco peaks with 180 million gallons of treated sewage for snowmaking per year. And so when the courts failed, because they're not set up to serve Indigenous people, when the petitioning failed, when the politicians were in the pockets of the corporation, when everything else failed, this was not just our contingency plan, but we had a community that was ready to support people who were willing to put their bodies in the way of machinery. So now that we have our affinity group, we have to plan. So strategy is just our plan to reach our goals. This orientation assumes that you already have an existing campaign with goals like short-term, mid-term, long-term, and a strategic vehicle to reach those goals with a timeline as well. So this is the how part of the presentation. So tactics, again, are actions that help us reach our goals. When we're talking about direct action, folks usually over-focus on the sexy photo ops that happen, but don't see the long-term organizing campaign work that generally occurs outside of the frame of those pictures. So aside from organizational goals, with actions we have specific goals, like timing, or do we want to delay something from happening? Is that our intervention action? Inflicting material damage on a level of short of property destruction. Do we want to call attention? So basically the strategy there is making business so bad that this corporation wants to get out of it, right? So do we want to call attention to an injustice, to inspire people, to provide a deterrent? Do we want to garner public attention, i.e. to do a publicity stunt? Do we want to motivate our audience? So we consider who our audience is, and we also consider what they will respond to best. And that means exploring the tone of the action. What is the tone? Is this an angry, is it a loud action? Is it a soft? Yes. Is it a rowdy, fierce feedback action? I want to know. Our audience obviously will respond to that. We establish a shared understanding of the goals of the action from the outset will save us a lot of headaches from a lot of headaches later when we have our plans shift and our potential conflicts arise. So again, I just want to repeat that. Establishing a shared understanding of the goals of an action from the outset will save us a lot of headaches from a lot of headaches later when our plans shift and potential conflicts arise. So just plan. Understanding goals. So direct action tactics usually focus on holding space. So we also consider hard or soft actions. So anything that's a soft actions basically are qualified with like linking arms, right? Sit-ins, die-ins, anything that doesn't use any kind of tool. So those are soft actions. Soft actions are awesome, and they're not any worse or better than hard actions, which I'll explain what they are. Because they have different advantages for different settings. Soft actions, for example, if you're just linking arms and blockading a street, and then law enforcement show up, maybe, or let's say the trucks transporting uranium started taking another route. With a soft action, if you're not locked into heavy equipment, you can just move with a group of people. You can be very fluid. You can scale the action. You can go into another room with a group of people linking arms. You can do different kinds of body entanglements. You can do what are called puppy piles, even though they're somewhat, you just make sure people bathe before, I guess. Puppy piles, just everybody piling on and just restricting access to a door. Like you could link arms in that door. If the meeting changes to another room, well, you're not locked in or chained to something, so your whole group can move. So soft actions can be very flexible and scalable. Hard actions, so this is a lockbox, some people call it a lock tube. There's just a pin in here. It's a small pin that allows a carabiner that's chained to my wrist to lock onto. So I just have a little link here around this small chain, and there's a pin in here that enables me to lock on. So I'm locked in. Some of you have probably used these devices before. This is just 1/4-inch PVC. It's 4-inch in diameter. It also has a whole bunch of duct tape, chicken wire, and some other, devices in here to obstruct cutting and extraction from law enforcement. These can also be made of 1/4-inch steel, same size and dimensions. This is about 3 feet long, but these are very effective in holding space. So this would be used and deployed for a hard action. So anything that uses tools, like in the upper right picture, you have people with concrete 55-gallon drums filled with concrete and lock tubes stuck in them. So it makes it harder for law enforcement to extract you. Usually, in that case, it makes law enforcement, gives them a bigger headache, so they look at potential other ways of negotiating to get people to release themselves. And that's why we use these carabiners, because I could just release myself, right, if I wanted to. But our objective in this case is holding space. So we research the charges that we possibly face always when we're planning actions. And we're also constantly asking ourselves, do we need to escalate this? Are we going to start, perhaps if law enforcement, they're not used to protests, like at UNM, has anybody done lockdowns or demonstrations to address the nuclear realities that y'all face here? So I would recommend not starting with like 55-gallon drums. Like I would say consider escalation. Start with soft blockades. If people don't get arrested, that works out. It's empowering. experience, and then you can escalate. You can start with PVC, then you can go to steel, then you can go to 55-gallon drums. You know? That's escalation and scalability. I want to say something about symbolic actions, because sometimes people dismiss actions as symbolic, but symbolic actions can be exemplary, right? They provide an example of resistance, an example of that expression, connection of people saying no. And it can be very powerful and mobilizing, as long as the action is planned and prepared right, and it can be empowering on that basis. So we do our research. In primary actions employed by the anti-nuke networks, or in anti-nuke work, it's primarily been the realm of blockades and occupations. Blockades just stopping something from going through an area, transport, for example. Occupations holding space. Just go to next. Just some pictures real quick of different actions. This is I chained myself to a bulldozer at one point. Next, and that was actually a spontaneous action. This is a quarantine action. So we have a visual, right? We're communicating that there's something toxic in this site. Next. This is a creative action where we use a video projector, a car battery, and an inverter, and you can put that in a shopping cart and just go around and project images and do guerrilla projection and intervene in narratives. Very creative. Yeah. We just used the cheapest projector that we could get with our youth group, and we did it at night. So this picture is probably the exposure is a little bright, but just do tests. You can go out, test on a building, and experiment. I can send you, if you're very interested, there's a manual. It's like a 60-page manual on guerrilla street art projection. So I'll send that to you. If anybody else wants it, I can send it to you too. So next, I'm just sharing this one, this anti-war, anti-Guantanamo Bay action, but this one picture communicates that all, right? So they don't need banners even. So think about that when we would create a picture, snapshot for planning our actions. Next. Short video, but I'm just going to play part of it. So this is actually, let's turn off the audio. So this is an occupation of the Border Patrol headquarters in Tucson, Arizona, which is attached to an Air Force base. So this is a high-level Homeland Security facility. 6 of us locked down with these lock boxes, and we had bicycle U-locks to our necks for our action support team. So our action support team was actually part of the arrestable action. So they had their hands free when we didn't, and they were able to give us water and food. We held this space. So this is a column in the lobby of the Border Patrol headquarters in Tucson. We held this space for 6 hours. We were charged with trespassing and disorderly conduct. The trespassing charge was actually filed wrong, and the disorderly conduct charge, we fought in court and we won. And so we were found not guilty. So we held this. We were expecting to go to jail like we meant it, but when you get a pass like that, you can't ignore it. So we have our legal support, we have our police liaison. We also, as an indigenous rooted direct action, we did prayer before this, we did ceremony. We had an elder as a liaison to the police. And the funny thing is the elder, the police stopped talking to our police liaison, and they only started talking to the elder, because I guess apparently the elder they felt was more reasonable. And the elder, Ophelia Rivas, helped to negotiate a cite and release. So basically we weren't even extracted, because the cops did not want to cut us out of this. What they did is they said, if you release yourselves, we will give you a paper citation, and we're going to take you off this base, the property, and you're free to go. So what we did is we released ourselves. Some people had to be cut out because they really committed. They didn't even have their keys. We were cuffed. We were marched out the back of the facility, and then we were given paper tickets, and we were released at the gates. And we got our friends and our banners, and we went around the front, and we kept protesting. So just putting this out there, this is a good example of an empowering action. This is really powerful and spiritually based, indigenous rooted action. We had traditional singers as well supporting us and so forth. So there's a lot of components. So next, please. Mauna Kea. This is a powerful example of a soft blockade. There's no tools, no fancy equipment, lock boxes, but they shut down the road to Mauna Kea, this 30-meter telescope site up there, and they precipitated a crisis to the point where the governor pulled the permit for the telescope. And right now they're in court, though. So yeah, there was a victory for protection of sacred places, but it's only a partial victory because right now they're in court and they're going back and forth. But this action precipitated the crisis to the point where the intervention of the governor was necessary, and they pulled the permit because it was such a mass-scale action. I highly recommend looking into it. Next. I can send this to y'all. You can press. So we do use diapers. If you're going to be there for 6 hours, think about that. Research the possible charges. Are your logistics and tasks clear? Have you rehearsed your roles and actions? Do you have water, food, batteries charged? Are diapers? John McCain. Recon clear. We prepared for worst case scenarios. Jail support number, we typically write it on our arm in Sharpie. And remember, we have in our affinity group a jail support person. So next, please. Some basic tips. Again, you're going to hear me repeat this over and over again. Strategy drives tactics. Not every action has to be strategic, though. And a powerful example of that is Eloise Brown and Doda Desert Rock, $3.5 billion coal-fired power plant they wanted to impose on the Navajo Nation. And one day, some folks from Scythe Global Power were surveilling on her land, so she pulled her car right in front of them and said, "Nope, you're not coming through here." And she called her family. They started an occupation. They had a multi-year occupation, and ultimately precipitated a crisis where they shut that power plant down. It still hasn't been built to this day. So she didn't go through direct action trainings. So keep that in mind, right? You have one up on Eloise Brown. No, I'm just kidding. She's a force, powerful force. Having an experienced group can help facilitate a faster, organized response to crisis. Having action agreements can help prevent collective drama. Your tone, is it proactive, is it reactive? Escalation, hard or soft? Scalability, mobility, accessibility. Is this action accessible to folks of different abilities? And art and creativity, and I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I think this is really important. But with art and creativity, artists have a very powerful role in making sure that our banners are clear. Can people read them from like across the freeway? You might want to think about that. Contrast. Talk to artists and engage them, incorporate them in our organizing work. And there's a lot more that can be said about art. So next, establish zones. Actions, you can have a red zone where it's arrestable place. Typically, law enforcement have to give you an order to disperse or warning of trespass, so create a zone. There's a red zone that's potentially arrestable, like that doorway if we're blocking it. There's a yellow zone where it's just a gray area. You might be arrested or you might not, but it's going to be your choice. And then a green zone where it's clearly not an arrestable scenario situation. Identify a regrouping space, have an exit strategy, talk about situational awareness. Keep in mind that if you have cell phones on you, they can be used as evidence. Study extraction techniques and innovate. Next. What not to do. Don't put people intentionally at risk who haven't chosen it. Don't turn people over to the cops. Don't panic or act on rumors. No weapons or drugs. Do double checks at your pockets. If you can catch more charges. Vaseline, mineral oil-based basically products can trap chemicals. So if you anticipate like going into an area where law enforcement might use chemicals, just be aware of that. Don't wear contact lenses, even though I violate that all the time. Don't wear things that can be easily grabbed. Next. Focus on outcomes, and this is part of that cyclical process. We always do a review, we debrief, we talk about what were the outcomes of the action, we track our progress, we do follow-up work, any PR, public relations work, and media work, and we talk about, we have to build in mechanisms of self and collective care too, so we're not replicating trauma. Because actions, it can sound fun and empowering, right, to go into like this arrest process and go through the system, but it can also be very tiresome, it can be protracted. You can face a lot of years for this, you can face pain compliance from law enforcement. You can face extreme abuse. So making sure that you have collective and self-care planned for so you can take care of each other for healing. Next. So security culture, I'm just going to reference it. It's part of the how and a bit of the who in the process. We just, next. The important thing that I want you to know about security culture, and we have a zine out there, and I can also send you a link, is that it's a culture where people know and assert their rights, but It's also it becomes a culture when a group makes security violations socially unacceptable. And one of the most important things is that oppressive behaviors equal bad security culture. You become insecure in your work when you're treated like crap. This is bottom line. So if somebody's homophobic, transphobic, if they're masculinicist, if they're heteropatriarchal, and perpetuating sexism in a group, it makes the group insecure, right? And so good security culture means checking oppressive behaviors and building into our framework in our work, and doing that really important personal and interpersonal work of intersectional, addressing these systems of oppression on a meaningful basis, and not perpetuating them. So next. So we do things like avoid rumors. We don't turn other people over to cops. We don't interfere with other groups. We don't denounce others and their actions. If somebody's doing something that you don't like, respect their anger and their autonomy of risk, and just say, maybe this isn't the way we do things, but this is why we're here and this is what we're doing. There's different ways of not throwing other people under the bus, which are important and should be a subject for greater discussion. Live streaming and media issues. If you do something that might be illegal or you might catch charges for and you got away, don't tag yourself in Facebook. Just saying. There is a new political environment and criminalization of dissent with the Green Scare, with Enterprise Terrorism Act, with, after 9/11, a lot of things changed. And we saw that play out at Standing Rock. So there's very serious charges that people could take. So do research and think about what the implications are. If you're going into a federal facility, if you're going into potentially national security site, think about that and be smart about it. Next. Understand the legal process. If you've ever been arrested before, just appreciate that. Go through it. We don't have time to go over it, but you can talk to a lawyer and understand the legal process if you're unfamiliar with it. We shouldn't be afraid of it, just demystify it, understand it, and go from there. Next. Additional secure considerations are things like jail solidarity. The action doesn't stop when somebody's arrested. The action continues until all our people are free. And the charges are either dropped or plead out, or we support our people when they're inside until they're free from captivity. So that's when the action stops and we celebrate. Grand juries are important. Threat, again, criminalization of dissent. So next. In wrapping this up next, so I have some recommendations. So next. Oh, wait, go back. Go back. Go back. We're going to go forward now. Now go forward. Yeah, action group. Okay, so I have some recommendations. So there's a study group and an action group maybe. Next. My recommendations for y'all are to form affinity groups. You can form affinity groups here and now. It doesn't take very much. If y'all are, especially if you come from the same place, and there's a target that needs to be addressed, and it sounds like there's a wealth of them here in Albuquerque particularly, form a group around it and find a way. If you can't agree on making a plan, find other people. If you don't agree on the specific tactics, there's nothing saying you don't have to do it. You don't need a whole bunch of people. You don't need to go through a whole process. You don't need fancy direct action trainings. Just be smart about it. Think it through. Think, especially if you're risking some kind of arrest, think about the potential charges. So know their laws. Identify points of intervention and plan an action. Develop a communication plan as well. So media is a very important component of this, but it's beyond the scope of this presentation. And give extra food from this event to our relatives on the street. So those are my recommendations. And then the last slide has my contact. And just a sort of closing statement. I don't know if we have time for questions. Ending nuclear colonialism means waking from the spiritual dead zone of capitalism and colonialism. And that is a fight. Apocalyptic logic is creating a spiritual, mental, and emotional dead zone. And there's everything about nuclear that is apocalyptic. We must do everything we can to reject that dead zone culturally and physically. That means fighting back and fighting forward for future generations. After all, the future and our future, all of our future depends on it. So for a nuclear-free future, we say what? Yeah. So for a nuclear-free future, we say what? That's the fire that we need to continue from here. So I have those recommendations. If you have any questions, this again was a very short, condensed 2-day workshop, but it hopefully gave you something to think about, process, and build from there. So what do we have in time for questions, right? Thank you. I think we have time for 10 minutes of questions. Oh, awesome. I was like, did I talk too long? Thank you. I really appreciate it. Thank you. And maybe when we're doing the Q&A, if we can map in this room folks who have experience with direct action, folks who have experience at Ward Valley, right? We have people here who have been to Ward Valley and been part of that occupation. Do we have people who are part of the Clamshell Alliance or know about the Clamshell Alliance? Abalone Alliance, the Alliance for Survival. So if anybody in this room, if we can map that out, so if you have a question or if you even want to just talk about your experience in relation to direct action, the context and the history of direct action for the anti-nuke movement is powerful. More than 15,000 people sacrificed and were arrested in the course of less than a decade resisting the Nevada test site. That's the largest direct actions in US history, and the mobilizations have been all focused around the anti-nuke movement. So where's our second wave? Right here, right? That's what I love to hear. Okay, so questions or comments or rude gestures, I don't know.
Right here, I have it, yeah. So, okay, Summer?
Hi, my name's Benjamin Abbott. I commonly go by Summer, and I was one of the 6 folks arrested at Los Alamos at the Unoccupy action in 2012. So that's, I guess, the experience I have with anti-nuclear direct action, though. I mean, it was such a tame arrest that I almost wouldn't really call it a direct action. It was, more symbolic, and we did lots of prep and training and, endless meetings beforehand, and those included some more materially disruptive actions, which, in retrospect, I kind of wish we had taken, but for various reasons we didn't, and it was just a, stand in the road kind of thing, and see what happens. And it was a very friendly arrest as far as arrests go. Much more so than the other arrests that I've experienced. And we were only in the jail for a couple hours, if that. And they offered people snacks and all kinds of things. So, because they were expecting it, and they were intentionally trying to present themselves as being as nice as possible and that sort of thing. So, I'm not sure how effective it was in that context, but it at least did, continue that conversation, because so many folks have gotten arrested at different actions at Los Alamos and during the trial, because we were charged with various misdemeanors and were convicted of some of them, though nothing really happened to us. We just had to pay some minor fines, that sort of thing. And there was, of course, all the debate about what should we do. Should we refuse to pay the fines, and what will end up happening? I tried to refuse to pay the fines, but the judge basically said that he was just going to keep on calling me up to court indefinitely. I'd never get sentenced to jail. Nothing would ever happen. It would just be like drive up to Los Alamos forever. So after that, I did decide to pay some fines. And I also did community service at Food Not Bombs at the time, which was pretty entertaining. They didn't seem to care about that seeming contradiction. But I guess after that experience, what it made me think is that I'm not really as interested in those kind of symbolic interactions and scripted arrests. I'm not sure I'm really interested in arrest at all. I guess my preference is to disrupt systems without people getting arrested, because when people get arrested and you get caught up in that, it takes so much effort, all the legal support. So I guess those are the lessons I would take. And just also how difficult the whole organizing process is and how different actions usually turn out from, what you planned. Because in that case, yeah, we talked about blocking roads and doing all kinds of stuff and locking down, and, none of that actually happened. So. And that's the experience I've had in countless cases.
None of it happened yet.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing your experience. Was it an empowering experience?
I wouldn't describe it. I mean, the arrest itself, not so much. The action overall, I think so. Yeah, having people out there.
Well, then it was effective on a level, because I think demystifying the process, right, is important in understanding what our power relationships are and what ways we can take our power back are really important. I don't want to editorialize your experience, but I think that's important. It might not be for everybody, but thinking strategically, thinking tactically, what will be effective in thinking that through. And it's a powerful conclusion as well. So direct action isn't for every campaign. It might not be the way that we achieve the goals that we set out. So this is just, one component of it. But thank you.
So I wanted to share 2 actions that I was a part of that didn't involve arrests that I thought were effective. One of the actions was down on the border. It was organized by Ileana Rodriguez, who is no longer with us. She died at a young age from nothing related to civil resistance. But she found a piece of land close to the immigration officials' headquarters in Columbus, New Mexico. And then she organized about, there was probably 30 of us, to go down there, and we built a monument to the people who died crossing the border. And we built it out of adobes, and it still stands. And the local church has kind of taken over the monument, and it says on it, this monument is dedicated to those who died following their dreams. So there was no arrest. In fact, no one seemed to notice that we were doing this at the time. But as time went on, the local people added a huge cross and other things. And people bring flowers to the monument and Christmas decorations. So I thought that was a very effective action. And then many years ago, CARD opposed some experiments at WIP that we thought were dangerous. And we camped out in tents in November in front of congressional offices on the sidewalk. And the police, I don't know why, but they were sympathetic to us. I think it was because it was so cold. It was very cold. And we had 3 tents, and then we had a brazier to keep warm. And the news tuned into us and came every night to see if we were still sleeping there. And there was probably, and there weren't a lot of people involved, probably about 7 or 8 people involved. But it focused, the news focused on it. There was no arrest. And the experiments were stopped. Whether it had to do with us or not, I don't know, but I think it did have to do with that. So those, following up what Summer said, those are 2 actions I thought were very effective that did not involve arrest, though I know of others. Oh, and there's one more. I know during the defeat of the Sierra Blanca waste dump, a young Mexican organizer, I don't want to say her name because she's still working today in Albuquerque on issues, organized teachers and students to block the border. And the students and the teachers blocked the border between Mexico and the United States for hours, several different times. And that was also non-arrestable. I mean, you don't arrest little children usually, and so I think that was effective also.
Thank you.
All right, yeah, thank you guys. Thank you for holding these institutions and companies accountable. And we have less than 10 minutes for Q&A and comments, so Tino's gonna be next.
Hey guys, my name is Celestino Crow. If we didn't meet personally or if this is your first time here, thank you for coming. Clee, that was an excellent workshop. Thank you so much. So we're sharing experiences. I used to, actually back in, what was that? 2011, we started noticing that there was a lot of police killings. There was pretty much one a month. So I started filming police on my own. I did that for 3 years until it became sexy. And it was great because I had a lot of other people help me. But one of the things I wanted to relate to in Clee's workshop is that to creating spaces for brown people and trans people, and to give us an opportunity to learn and grow. And unfortunately, I had a lot of people that were really oppositional towards me. They were people, mostly white men, actually. One professor actually stole my work and taught a class here at UNM, but I knew it wasn't going to go very well because he was really boring and he sucked. So, so nobody went, but it still sucked. I kind of got out of that work. It was really exhausting. And I recently went to Standing Rock and stood alongside my Lakota and Oglala Sioux brothers and sisters. And I stood as a Two-Spirit person. I was asked to be on the Two-Spirit Council because of my experience with ceremony. And I just can't stress enough how important it is to use names and pronouns and creating space for two-spirited people. I can't explain to you what I saw in my camp, the absolute pain and invalidation, and still some of them, we lost some of them. We have lost some of them since, and it's only been a year. I tried to keep up with them, but I need your help. I need your help in creating those spaces. And I do want you to remember that, you might not agree with that person. And we have a lot of trauma. And sometimes it's hard to handle, it's hard to deal with. You need patience, and you need kindness and loving and compassion and understanding. But we really require that. I require that. And we definitely have a place here. And I just wanted to say that a piece about holding spaces, taking a step back is taking a huge step forward. And one of the reasons why we have this space is to have young people here, and I'm actually a little sad we don't have a lot of young brown people here. Because I wanted an opportunity for them to come and have some mentorship and to be reached out to in a respectful way, because we do that in our group. I respect these 3 people here so much, and I have something for you later. But anyways, I just wanted to say that. So thank you, Clee, for always holding spaces for us. Mutakayase.
Go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to echo what Tino said. Like, spaces like Nuclear Issue Study Group, as a person who flows between identities of female and androgynous, having this space and this comfort to direct, my passion for like nuclear issues and to stand with these people who accept me and validate me is amazing. So thank you. Yeah.
I'll try to do this quickly. Clay mentioned Ward Valley. Ward Valley sits 22 miles west of Needles, California, in the Mojave Desert. It is sacred land to the 5 tribes of the Colorado River. The fight lasted about 14, 15 years, but what finally did it was back in 1997, actually in 1997, in the fall, the nuclear industry in the state declared that they were going to come back out to Ward Valley and they were going to start drilling some new test wells and all this kind of stuff. The Save Ward Valley Coalition, which is a very interesting coalition, it was comprised of everyone from Earth First anarchists to Native elders and everything in between. The elders declared that no, they would not allow, and they did not want any further desecration. So we in the office, the Save Ward Valley office that I was running for about 4 years, we were going to do a direct action. Our plan was about a 3 or 4 day direct action. We were going to stop the tractors and equipment from coming in. Well, we ended up having about 200-300 people show up. And the elders of the 5 tribes got together. And during all this time, too, we had kids that had been sitting in trees up in the North Country that came down from the trees to the desert to join with us. And they were all real super direct action kids. So they were making their lockdown devices and, they were just so excited that this was going to happen. The elders declared, this isn't going to happen. So our 2 to 3 day action turned into a 113-day occupation of the land. On the first night, elders danced all night. The police showed up. The BLM showed up. The highway patrol showed up. We were ready. We were ready to be arrested. There was never an arrest. Part of the reason is the man that the BLM brought in to head the BLM decided he agreed with us. So a lot of things happened, but that 113-day occupation was the end of the Ward Valley Project. We closed the office in 2000. Whenever I start feeling overloaded, and we all do, I say to myself, there will never be a radioactive waste dump in Ward Valley. That's what direct action can do.
And the hope with mapping, the cartography of anti-nuke action and resistance is to share these stories and create an intergenerational movement, right? Connect and continue. I was done a while ago.
Okay, actually, we need to transition. I'm sorry, Marion. Is this on? Check. Okay, all right, thank you. I'm really sorry we're not cutting anyone off because this is a great segue into our Hall of Victories, which Eileen is going to talk about. And I just want to thank Clee for coming out here and being here. Yes, definitely. And
I want to really thank Leona, especially because she just committed to getting arrested with me and blocking. No, just kidding. But no, thanks to the Nuclear Issue Study Group and thanks to Leona, the powerful work that they're doing here, bringing us all together. So it takes a lot to do this, so thank you.
And I want to echo what Sue said, or Sue's request that you come back. And we already kind of talked about this, which we might do, and obviously not in a streamed session. So, and I don't know, I'm sure Clee talked about the banners and things that he contributed. Our logo, our artwork is all from Clee. And I work with Clee in Hall No, and he also came up with this clever name of the campaign. But I just wanted to say thank you because I think we, as a movement, we need to do these things. So I just wanted to share a little story, and I'm sorry to keep you guys a little bit longer, but I heard a quote or somebody say from South America, you know those guys in the United States, they get a few hundred people together and then they walk around in circles. When we get a march together, we pull millions. And we need to do that. And here in the United States, I have not seen that kind of movement in the anti-nuke work that we do. And somebody told me I was born in the wrong generation, that this was a thing of the 80s. And I was like, no, it didn't stop in the 90s. I mean, we need to keep fighting. I was just in Europe. I attended a couple meetings. I've been talking about these at the COP23 in Bonn, Germany. They have very close, about 40 kilometers away, the largest coal mine in Europe. And the day I arrived, I missed this, but they marched. There was 4,000 people who marched into the mine, and they shut it down. They shut down those huge, huge machines. They were very successful in what they did. And then later, a few days, some of the students, the young people, United States citizens, disrupted the United States meeting at the COP. The United States had only one presentation at this meeting, and it was from LNG, liquefied natural gas representative, Peabody Coal, boo! And then the nuclear panel. So I got this button. Where did it go? So they were handing out these buttons about clean. So they talk about clean coal and nuclear. So we took their buttons and put these little X's through them. But they were all over touting how nuclear is the answer for climate change, and the United States is moving in that direction. So we're here to say no, and we're here to say no nukes. No nukes.
And just real quick, Leona, 1 million people? Well, you just called everybody out. So you got 1 million friends, right? So just let us know when and where.
So we'll be letting you know. And so I wanted to just end with those two little stories. And also, we have some announcements to make. So thank you again. And to this lunch session, we'll have a shorter session. So we're going to try to catch up on time because we had the technical difficulties this morning. And so we'll be coming back for lunch at 1:30. And it's already 12:55, so it's a very quick lunch, but we know you guys will respect and honor all the presentations we have lined up this afternoon. So we were going to try to keep on time, and Eileen's going to talk a little bit about the timeline of resistance. And don't forget to fill out those evals. We really would like your input. And then, of course, the pledges. So the pledges don't state exactly what we're going to do, but it's about this. It's about taking action and getting involved. So thanks here, Eileen.
Yeah, just real quick, this was such a rich presentation, and I know that we all want to continue these conversations, and there's more stories to be heard. So if people can take advantage of the butcher paper back there, we want to, so we've been writing, I love that people have been writing moments of resistance and examples of resistance, and I would just ask you to include those stories. So Janet, the stories that you told, and Summer, and other examples of what we might call victories. And I think this is also a larger conversation, because what we frame as victories might be, we might disagree about that perhaps, and I think that's okay. I think we're weaving a tapestry here of how we want to move forward. So as you leave and throughout the rest of the day, just please do write any examples of victories, whatever that may be. And we're going to return to it at the end of the day today. So enjoy lunch. Please do check out the food truck. That's it. Thank you.
See you at 1:30.
Yeah, 1:30.
Leona will have 5. Well, we're dedicating most of the time to audience input. So it's like an hour and 15 minutes, but we're dedicating most of the time. Okay. They're queuing up for presentation. Student presentation. Yeah, the college is doing that. Yeah, Joel is. All right, guys, thank you for attending the panel for Take Action. We're gonna start now. Sorry, we started a bit late. So me and Joel will be moderating this panel, and Joel will start with an introduction to the Nuclear Issues Study Group.
Yes, it is working. Thanks everyone for being here. Joel Lorimer from the Nuclear Issues Study Group. We're going to be talking about actions today, and want to let everybody know very briefly about some major projects we'll be working on in the next several years. The first of which is the next review for the mixed land waste fill, whatever it's called. The nuclear dump, which is in 2019, and Dave is going to address that. And in 2020, there's going to be a contingent of people from Australia, including Aboriginal people, who are planning to do walks at in various parts of the states to significant nuclear historical sites, Alamogordo, Los Alamos, etc., Church Rock. On the 75th anniversary of the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And I think, Leona, are you going to talk a little bit more about that possibly? And then very quickly, we had a film scheduled for Friday night about the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and we didn't have time to show that. But it's listed in the program, and you can see it online. It's on YouTube if you search for the title of that film. I mention that because the treaty, which people have mentioned during the weekend, was the direct outgrowth of 3 international conferences on the medical and humanitarian impact of nuclear war. So these 3 significant conferences took place, and out of them arose the treaty. The film is graphic evidence of the effects of nuclear weapons. So just, if you have any desire to learn more about that information's available.
Thank you, Joel. Do you want to introduce yourself to the audience?
I already did.
Oh, I'm sorry. So we're going to start the panel, and I'm going to be doing introductions for the panelists. Each of you panelists will have 10 minutes because we want audience input from the segueing from Clee's powerful presentation about direct action, because we want to hear more from you and what we can do together to, have no nukes here. We need resistance from everybody. And so I'll start with an introduction of myself. Denise Brown in Kiani do Tabahe Bashistun Thank you, everybody, for being here. My name is Denise Brown. I'm an undergrad, a student of UNM of American Studies, and I am here supporting and coordinating with the Nuclear Issues Study Group. and let's get this started, guys. So first we have is Patuch Gilbert from Pueblo of Acoma.
Good afternoon, folks. Where's everybody? I thought there was a much larger crowd than this, I guess. But this always occurs when events go on for 2-3 days. Okay, I'm talking about, and I asked a question and center my comments around this question. Why are not New Mexico citizens anti-nuclear? Because I see, and I live here, and you know, we're very involved in this anti-nuclear work at the local level, which is on against uranium. But yet, I look out at the general public, and I don't see New Mexico citizens being anti-nuclear. So, and thinking about it, and it's because of, and you know the answer really, and it's because of money and greed. And so the talks that have been happening these last couple of days, they've described that. And it's this phenomenon of New Mexico's addiction to nuclear money and nuclearism and nuclearization is very pervasive. And it's hard to counteract. So that even like, this glory, I guess, of being the birthplace of the atomic bomb is persistent in, I think, people's minds. So remember several years ago, was it 2015, when Congress and the New Mexico politicians were arguing and debating for recognizing the contributions of New Mexico to the atomic bomb. And so they enacted, and it's actually a law today, the Manhattan Historic National Project. And so Los Alamos and I think it was Oak Flats, and I'm not sure if it was Hanford, that have all been recognized by law as being nationally recognized historic places. And so the National Park Service and the Department of Energy manage this designation. And so in New Mexico, the citizens, I think, have this love-hate relationship with nuclearism. And look at the amount of monies that go into Llano and Sandia laboratories. And what other state has 2 immense national laboratories? I think this year, the Defense Authorization Act, I don't know if it's been signed, but had $4 billion in there for Llano. And then yesterday it was mentioned that Sandia's federal allocation is $3.2 billion. So you have this this $1 trillion business coming into New Mexico. And even the Congressional Budget Office, you know, just recently said if America is going to upgrade its nuclear weaponry, it's going to take $1.2 trillion. And you can bet that the people at Sandia and Llano are just drooling over this prospect. And so again, you know, another instance of this huge amounts of money is coming in, is, as we all know, is WHIP. From the construction and the ongoing maintenance and implementation of it is huge. I think that just, was it this year, that just in subcontract work at WHIP was $44 million. There's just projects that goes into cleaning up the problems that were associated with it, and many other things that, and even I was listening to, I think, the news, even this legal challenge of New Mexico against DOE you know, all they're talking about is money, 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 money. Let's get more money for the state. And so, the impetus for more money, I call it greed, really, is such that now we have saying, some of the politicians and local citizenry in there, in Carlsbad, are saying, let's look at storing high nuclear radioactive waste. I mean, that's crazy. And so those possibilities always, I think, exist when people are demanding jobs. You know, they want tax revenues, and we get caught into that kind of capitalistic greed. Then, of course, we see Uranco. The uranium enrichment facility, when it was in construction in, 2015, the company had said that, oh, we've already spent $4 billion. And look at what we're paying I think it was in that same year. And it was about 44 million that went into the jobs, local communities. And I believe that that's the reason, again, that we're looking at, that people consider in HOTEC or the waste controls facilities down there, all because of the desire for more money. And the other, I think, that we tend to maybe not remember is all the years of the 50 years of mining uranium and milling in where I'm from, in the Grants Mining District that occurred. So that today, even the citizens from Milan and Grants, they want in Roca Honda mine. That's the new mines that's been proposed at Mount Taylor. And several years ago, I'm with the Multicultural Alliance for a Safe Environment. I and a colleague of Mace, we went to go see Senator Clemente Sanchez. And of course, he's pro-uranium, pro-mines. And I really wanted to emphasize to him that, hey, we're anti-nuclear. But I couldn't do that because even in my own community of Milan and Grants, it seems like we are not anti-nuclear. We're anti-uranium, we're anti-cleanup legacy mines and mills, but are we really anti-nuclear? And it seems like and that's the impetus that I want to emphasize, is that we're not. And maybe the courage is to counteract the politicians and citizenry of all the towns and universities that get these monies needs to be really challenged. And the other area that I'm really haven't mentioned and neglected is the whole, I think, U.S. military establishment in New Mexico that also gets this huge chunks of money, at the Kirkland Air Force Base and, Holloman Air Force Base. And so even the storage of, they say, the world's largest collection of nuclear arsenals or bombs is right here on the edge of really the city at Kirkland Air Force Base. And and then I keep thinking about, well, what can we do to get the people in New Mexico against this nuclear addiction or against the nuclear monies? And that's an extreme challenge because how do you then? I remember when Senator Domenici really was the force behind more monies for Lana, more monies for Cindy, more monies for the university. And of course, then even today, I was asking, I don't know whether I was talking to Don Hancock about the current New Mexico congressional delegation. They were supporting this year's defense authorization for LANO. And that they're going to continue to do that. And Representative Pierce, who's running for governor, we're going to have to pressure him, about his stance on the tax bill, his stance on these monies that are coming into the state. So I think what I just really want to emphasize is how do you motivate people to counteract this mentality. One could be as an action is to encourage us to be anti-nuclear, to really talk about what is it to be anti-nuclear. I have a friend that works for the European counterpart of LANO is CERN. It's in Switzerland, the Center for Economic Research on Nuclear, and they differ mainly in one respect, that it's not research in plutonium triggers for atomic bombs. It doesn't go into weaponry, but it does concentrate on nuclear research. So there is, in some respects, I suppose, a conundrum. Could there be benefits from nuclear? And that's a challenge, and that's why, again, we encourage young people to really look into nuclear studies. A professor, and I met an acquaintance he teaches at the University of Idaho, and he told me, he says, my students that are coming into the program, he teaches nuclear science, he says they don't understand, they don't have the vocabulary around nuclear. So definitely we need that. And so it's not only, I think, gaining more education around nuclearization, nuclearism, and nuclear power. The other thing that I heard this yesterday, and because I was encouraging Leona, why can't we get a declaration out of this gathering, this symposium, to actually do a declaration about nuclear. If it's anti-nuclear, that's great. The group I'm with, the Multicultural Alliance for a Safe Environment, we have a nuclear-free zone declaration, but it's only concentrated on the Grants Mining District. So that's another action step that I think that really can be taken. And the other one, the last thing that I'll talk about, is the need for collaboration. And I got jumped on all over by my own group at the last base meeting we had, because I was saying that we don't do enough collaboration. Even though, yeah, we are working with the Tularosa Downwinders in having amended RECA, the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act. We're working together on it. And so that's one instance of collaboration. Yeah. So we've got to keep doing that. I think we know each other. We know CCNS, or we know the Los Alamos Study Group, but let's work together on really being anti-nuclear. Yep. Thanks, folks.
Yeah, thank you, Batuch, for all the suggestions you just made. I think he made he addressed a good question that we can put out to the audience, which is, what can we do? And the last thing he said was collaboration. And I think we can do that. We're all here already, so let's make it happen. And so we'll move into the next speaker, who is Dave McCoy from Citizen Action, New Mexico.
Hi, glad to see you all. Just before Thanksgiving, I drove through Beatty, Nevada, on the way to Oregon. And we stopped, took the kids to a park, and I started talking to one of the park guys and said, hey, you had an explosion or a fire or something here, didn't you? He said, yeah, I got a good friend that took a video of it. I said, oh, really? What's his name? He said, it was Vern. Where's Vern live? Well, he's up here at Beatty Apartments. So I went up there. Well, Vern wasn't there, but the landlady was, and she said, yeah, I'll give your phone number to Vern. So Vern contacted me and sent me a picture that he took, and it looks like a mushroom cloud. It is a mushroom cloud. And, when that happened in October of 2015, back earlier than that, in February 15, we had been warning the New Mexico Environment Department that you could have an explosion from metallic sodium at the mixed waste landfill. That's all been ignored and denied. But we know from the disposal sheets that there was metallic sodium and also high-level waste in the form of spent nuclear fuel rods placed in that dump. I counted at least 70. Now, the Environment Department and Sandia Labs is in great denial about any danger from this mixed waste landfill. I've been fighting that situation since 2006, and other people have been involved in it earlier than that. One of the things that's going to be happening in 2019 is that the Environment Department and Sandia are required to do a review for the excavation, the feasibility of excavation of the mixed waste landfill. And it's important for people right now to get involved in that. What's that old song? I'm going to sit right down and write myself a letter. Right? Okay. Well, sit right down and write yourself a letter to New Mexico Environment Department and demand that they begin disseminating information about the upcoming review and that they start having some meetings with the public about that review, because I can guarantee you what is going to happen is that Sandia Labs is going to trot out all the lies in all the documents that they've filed over the last 10 years for all the hearings they've had to justify putting down a cover and leaving that waste in place. They're going to trot out all those documents, and they're going to submit those, and they're going to say, you see, there's no problem with the dump. And they're going to ask to basically just walk away from it, monitor it once in a while, but their monitoring system is defective, so that's not really a good program. In your letter, you need to demand that the Environment Department order Sandia Labs to provide a cleanup schedule for excavation and safe storage of the mixed waste landfill. And the Environment Department should require hearings to be held on what those cleanup plans are going to be, so we can look at it. Now, they've argued for some time that, well, it's too dangerous to dig it up, but it's a safe dump the way it is. Well, let me tell you, the stuff that's in there will be around for millions of years. It's high-level waste, and that high-level waste comes from nuclear reactor meltdown experiments that were performed at Sandia Labs after the 3 Mile Island meltdown. And there were nuclear spent fuel that was used for that, those experiments from around the world, reactors around the world. So what's in that dump is extremely dangerous. It's generational in its danger. It's just like, you know, what you've got stored up at Lannel, and it needs to be safely handled, not left in place above an aquifer. There's a lengthy history of collusion between the Environment Department and Sandia Labs, and the EPA for that matter. There have been numerous documents that have been hidden, suppressed. One of the things that Citizen Action has been effective at is getting documents that they like to keep hidden from us. And I would suggest to all of you that you take free use of the Freedom of Information Act and the public records request when you need to get information about things, because that's the only way you're going to get it. You have to pry it out of them. Citizen Action has been to court 3 times with federal agencies. We've been to court with the New Mexico Environment Department to get information. So it's an important thing to use. And it doesn't take much effort. And John Fleck from the Albuquerque Journal once referred to me as a serial FOIA offender. I filed hundreds of those things, and I filed them in Idaho too, and it's just amazing what you get back sometimes, you know, because agencies are sloppy. You think, oh, they think, you know, nobody's going to be interested in this, you know, but there it is, you know. One of the things that they did was they promoted Ron Curry to Region 6 EPA administrator in order to end any further discussion of problems at Sandia Labs. I found that pretty interesting. Then one of the things that's going on is this amendments to the Nuclear Waste Policy Act. And of course, they're thinking about, well, let's bring it to New Mexico. You know, they don't know what they're doing down there. A bunch of ignorant, poor folk, you know. We've already managed to create a salt mine down there. And there's such a poor track record. You've got fires and explosions. You have release of all kinds of radiation up at Los Alamos. You've got all these. There's not a single Department of Energy facility in the United States that hasn't leaked nuclear waste into the environment. Not one. So when they talk about bringing waste here, you know there's going to be more accidents, and we're talking spent fuel. That stuff is really dangerous. How are they going to handle the spent fuel elements that are leaking? You know, you're not hearing any of the details about that, you know. There's an absence of siting criteria. The National Environmental Policy Act is being bypassed. This temporary storage that they're asking for is going to become permanent. This concept about consent of the community. What a crock of crap that is. You know? Community. Who's the community? Heaton? Pierce? A few people that want to get some extra bucks down in southern New Mexico, that's not the New Mexican community. When you talk about a community, it's got to be more than just a few people in a local town, you know, wanting more of the same poison. 1 minute. There's a conflict with the Land Withdrawal Act, and it's going to cut citizens out of the licensing process. You can bet on that. So my advice, bottom line, is the old saying out of the 60s, think global, act local. The most dangerous things going on are right around you, you know, take heed. Number one, mixed waste landfill and Sandia's activities in bomb building. Number two, the Kirtland Air Force Base jet fuel spill. It's a monster, and it's gonna affect us. And they're no further along in their planning for that accident remediation than they were 3 years ago when they were late in planning for it then. So I'm just throwing that in addition to the nuclear problem.
All right.
Thank you, Dave. I think you hit up on a lot of points, mainly accountability from these institutions and how that lack of accountability physically harms us and it's physically violent to us. So on that note, we'll go with our last speaker, who you all are familiar with, Leona Morgan. She's awesome. She's part of many groups, and let's hear what she has to say. Thank you, Denise. Okay, so I just wanted to respond to a couple of things that both Paduch and Dave here talked about, and something Karen mentioned the other day. So I know I'm going to try to put this all in 10 minutes. One of the things about the group, I was formerly a part of the MACE Coalition. I think the idea of having coalitions and alliances and things like that is very important. But and this is something, it's not just that group, but a lot of groups I have been a part of were not doing what we're doing here in Nuclear Issues Study Group. There was a void. There was something lacking. And I often speak about this at national anti-nuke gatherings. So this conference is really walking the talk. Like, I can't go somewhere and complain about their lack of inclusion or not having young people or people of color there. And so that's what we're doing here today. We're filling this void, and we feel it's needed. And I think it's very appropriate what we're doing had to be happening in New Mexico, in the belly of the beast. And so that's why we're here. And it was kind of funny when we were planning this conference, we were trying to organize, okay, what are we going to do this day, or what are we going to do that day? And okay, on Saturday, we're going to dismantle the nuclear beast. Well, how do we do that? Well, first we need to learn everything about it. We need to dissect the beast. We need to take it part by part so that we can study those parts, and then we can fight it. And then after we take it apart, then we're going to kill it. Then we're going to slay the beast. And so our thinking was, okay, we're going to dissect it, and then we're going to kill it. And I was explaining it to somebody, and they were like, wow, that's really brutal. You're going to dissect it while it's still alive. So we're learning as we go. But I know normally you before you butcher a sheep, you have to kill it first. But no, I just wanted to share some of these stories because our group, we just started a year and a half ago. We just started planning this conference in June. We came up with the idea. We brainstormed it in June, and then we scrambled to get it going. So this is our first event. As an organization, I think this is our first event. Yeah, so thank you. Really appreciate it. So Dave talked about Beatty. I was driving to Reno, Nevada in October 2015. I had a meeting there, and a friend of mine, I said, okay, we're not going to fly because we wanted to visit a friend, John Redhouse. He lives near Reno, and he's a very important person in the indigenous movement. And so we got to Reno, and we were driving through Death Valley. We both get to the hotel, and we're just like, wow, it's really dry here. And then the rest of the time, we're like, man, the casino hotels are really smoky, and both of us were like, do you feel like you're getting sick? Both of us had these impacts to our bodies that were very apparent. And then I had all these emails, I saw all these things like warning alerts, but I was in the middle of a meeting, so I just, as I often do, I ignored a lot of my emails. And then I get home, and then I see there was this big radioactive release that I drove through, over and back. And that, I still have a little bit of PTSD every time, so I get kind of emotional. Because I don't know what's going to happen to me. We just drove through it, but what about the people who live there? What about the workers? All of those downwinders, what's going to happen to them in 20 to 25 years? And is there any accountability to that? Or is the government going to say, well, did you smoke? Those kinds of things. So, like I said, I'm going to try to do this in 10 minutes. Karen brought up Tempe. The DOE was doing the consent-based siting. I'm really lucky I have a good friend in the room. I was in Washington, D.C. at a meeting, and I was like, I need to fly back to Albuquerque and then get in my car and drive to Phoenix because this meeting is happening, and it has to deal with New Mexico, but they're having it in Phoenix. So my good friend Diane Dorigo was like, well, we'll just get you the flight from Washington, D.C. to Phoenix, and then get a rental and drive home. So I was at this consent-based siting meeting, and I asked the DOE, well, who said we consent? Who said we want it in New Mexico? And they said, well, we got an application from WCS and Holtec. I asked them, was it the elected officials? Because they don't represent us. But then they said it was a company. Yeah, so this is their idea of consent-based siting. Okay, so we had an awesome presentation this morning from my relative, Clee Benali. And I'm very privileged and honored to work with Clee. He's my #1 supporter. So many times the work I've done has been invisibilized. I've dealt with people taking the credit, people not funding my work, heteropatriarchy, everything. And so this person has done so much to make sure that doesn't happen in Hall No. And so he's very, very special to me. And so it was very emotional, this whole gathering, because everything is, it's coming together. And I just want to thank Denise and everyone for their support, because it's been hard. It's been a hard 10 years. The first meeting I went to, when NDOM, the first organization I worked for, they voted me into the board. The board said, okay, yeah, you can work for us. And I thought they were going to sign the contract to pay me and all of that. 6 months later, they said, oh, we don't owe you any money. We never signed the contract. But little did I know at the time, until I was at a meeting here in Albuquerque with Paul Robinson and some others. The meeting that they voted me in on occurred on July 16th, 2009. I had no clue. Didn't know nukes, like I said, we started the group on February 14th, 2014. So it's just incredible. I don't know if these are coincidences or what. But we're here now, and I have less than 5 minutes to finish my talk. I got 3 minutes, and so I wanted to run through some of these things that we got going on, some of these actions that we're going to do, some of these things that need to happen. And so we were visited by some of our relatives from Australia. They came to the Nuclear Issue Study Group meeting, and they want to work with us to organize this walkabout across the state of New Mexico. They do it every 5 years during the NPT negotiations, Nuclear Proliferation Treaty, the UN thing. So I'm trying not to do the jargon thing, but everybody probably knows NPT. They used to walk across the United States all the way to New York. Now they don't. They're sick of New York, so they want to walk around New Mexico, and so we're going to take them from site to site, and we'd like you guys to get involved in that. We'd like you to walk with us. We'd like you to join us, to support us, to organize this. And what we're going to do also is we're going to work with Isleta. We're going to honor the work that Dave has done for 11 years, all these FOIA requests. We're going to use this work. We're going to put it out there. We're going to expose them. We're going to bird dog them, and more. We're going to stop them. We're going to make them clean up this mixed waste landfill. And and with Hall No, so I talked about 1872. So Forest Service says they will not deny permits. Arizona Department of Environmental Quality says they do not deny permits, that they regulate. And the regional office is right here downtown. So Nuclear Issue Study Group is talking about doing some stuff there. So get involved. We have another thing I'm going to talk about on the stream, but some peaceful, nonviolent actions to bring awareness to what is being allowed. And so that's one of the things we're proposing is a continuous vigil outside the Forest Service office. And then also we need to make some plans about this UN treaty. That's also on our docket. Last thing I want to mention again is we're planning a group of us called the Nuclear Heritage Network. We're working on this camp next summer in southern France. That's an excellent place to gather and network and work with people internationally. The other things that I wanted to mention is July 16th is an International Day of Action. Anyone can take that on. We all know what's going on with that. The Tularosa Basin Downwinders Consortium could use your support outside of the Trinity site. Church Rock, they have a march every year. August 6th and August 9th, these are also major days of international days of action. And there's all kinds of levels of action people can take individually, if you vote or not, whatever, you can do many things, write letters, get involved, educate yourself, groups, lawsuits, things like that. Maybe we'll move that direction, I'm not sure. But one of the strongest things that I think as indigenous peoples that we can do is specifically with Hall No, what's going on there is the regulations on transport of radioactive waste, radioactive materials. We have no control over it. The states have no control, the municipalities, the tribal governments. And so as the Navajo Nation has a law against radioactive transport, what happened is Trump sent a message to our president and said, you can make any laws you want, but we still have control over those roads and the railroads. So in order for our nation to stand up to the federal government, it has to break federal policy. and it's not willing to do that. And they've made that very clear to us. Our own tribal government has told us. So that's why we started Hall No, and then we found that out. But we need to take some serious action. If our own tribal government is not going to do it, it requires a lot more than just sitting through an awesome 1-hour presentation. But these are some of the things coming up, and these are some of the things that we should do, as well as what Batuch talked about, is getting this nuclear free zone declaration declared in Albuquerque, in Bernalillo County, and one day hopefully in the state of New Mexico. And so I'll end with that, and I have a lot more examples of some awesome actions I learned about in Europe that I'd like to share, but also if I don't have time to share them, I'll write them on the paper like everyone else can do. And we got these papers up on the wall that are places where we can input, and people, everybody, Karen, Kevin, Diane, if you guys have things going on, Joan and Marlene, we'd like to put them up there so people can get involved. And so this is a time now. We don't have time to organize at this conference, but we do have time to share and support and to take action. So thank you.
Thank you, Leona. So with that, we want to have your input and have your ideas that we started off with, like what can we do? And so we're going to do some progressive stack, POCs, women first, and then we'll get to the men. And so I think Diane has something important to say.
In the U.S. Congress, there's a bill, H.R. 3053. Dave McCoy mentioned it, the Nuclear Waste Policy Amendments Act of 2017. It would reignite the licensing process for Yucca Mountain, and I hope everyone here knows that Yucca Mountain is a very dangerous site and should not be considered anymore for high-level nuclear waste permanent dump. It's between active volcanoes and earthquake risk zones and connected to the water. And it was canceled by Obama and then Secretary of Energy. But now this bill, H.R. 3053, please write that down because you're going to be making a phone call and writing letters, H.R. 3053. And so it would reignite the licensing that was previously canceled for Yucca. It would legalize the kind of dump that they want to make here in Lee Eddy County, Holtec, and just across the state line at Waste Control Specialists. Those are the two places. It's illegal right now under the current law for supposedly interim centralized sites, and what this bill would do is to make that legal, and it would allow the high-level nuclear waste fund that was collected from the nuclear generators by our utility dollars. It would allow the money that's supposed to be for permanent dump to go to the companies that would run the supposedly interim dump. So the bill would re-threaten Yucca. It would legalize these supposedly interim dumps, which we are dubbing parking lot dumps, because it's just putting it on a pad in a parking lot, or the one here in New Mexico would be shallow holes in the ground. Okay, and it would, so anyway, the bill is bad. It would trigger tens of thousands of shipments from 30 to 40 years, roads, rails, waterways all threatened, and the House has the bill right now, but if it passes the House, it could go to the Senate, and Senator Udall from your state is a very likely person to help stop it, even though the Democrats are not in power. So it is important for New Mexicans to demand of your senators and your representatives that they stand strong and fight this bill. And we around the rest of the country will do everything we can to mobilize to support their leadership. But we don't have champions right now speaking out against these things, and we need them. And so anyway, that's what an action step is.
All right, thank you, Diane. Yeah.
Kevin can follow up on that. He and I are your DC people who are trying to fight it in DC.
Eileen. Yeah. Let's hear from a woman first.
Hi. Actually, I have a quick question for Dave. The mention of Beatty, which was a low-level radioactive waste dump, folks. Remember that. It wasn't even supposed, it wasn't high level. It was a low-level radioactive waste dump. That low level, that waste is what exploded. I have a question about the mixed waste dump. Was that dump required to have a liner?
The waste is here, the water's there, and the only liner is a dirt cover above the waste. There is no liner. And what's interesting in there was a hearing a year or so ago about corrective measures complete for the mixed waste landfill. And in that, they said that, well, it wasn't a RCRA cover, and so it really is not the most effective cover